Hi, it's me, Imogen, and today I'm going to talk about The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood. This was Margaret Atwood's first published novel in 1968, I think, or possibly 1969. Although it actually wasn't her first written novel, because her first written novel, which she tried to be published, was not published because it was apparently too gloomy. In my copy of the novel, at least, there's a very interesting introduction written by Margaret Atwood herself from 1979. She says that The Edible Woman was conceived by a 23-year-old and written by a 24-year-old, and its more self-indulgent grotesqueries are perhaps attributable to the youth of the author, though I prefer to think that they derive instead from the society by which she found herself surrounded. Most of Margaret Atwood's novels, which you probably already know, are usually based around female experiences or life as a woman. Since she began writing novels in the 60s, you can imagine she would, be writing from a place of difficulty, to say the least. With the societal limitations, women did not have as many choices, and it's questionable whether it's really so much freer now. Of course, on the outside it is, but her writing is still so relatable in a way that might never change. She also writes that it's noteworthy that my heroine's choices remain much the same at the end of the book as they are at the beginning, a career going nowhere or marriage as an exit from it. But these were the options for a young woman, even a young educated woman, in Canada in the early 60s. The goals of the feminist movement have not been achieved, and those who claim we're living in a post-feminist era are either sadly mistaken or tired of thinking about the whole subject. Now, of course, she is saying this in 1979, but it's sort of questionable whether this is still true or not. But regardless of your political stance, we at least know that that is the frame for this novel. The novel itself concerned young Marianne, I think recently out of college, working in a typical sort of 1960s desk job. And the main theme is sort of Marianne's reckoning with society's expectations of her as a woman, and whether she feels satisfaction in following the path of marriage and motherhood, and just generally becoming a housewife or similar. Outside of Marianne, there are a lot of interesting characters in the novel, such as her roommate Ainsley, who is sort of a polar opposite to Marianne. She's very confident in her femininity, she is confident about pursuing motherhood. The main unique aspect to Ainsley is that, or in her path of motherhood, is that she doesn't want to have a father involved. The majority of the novel, Marianne is in a relationship with Peter, who eventually she becomes engaged to. On the outside, Peter's sort of perfect. People describe him as handsome, he's very stylish, he's got a lot of money, and he would eventually, in the back of his mind, want to pursue a normal life involving Marianne. However, he's one of the strongest driving forces to cause Marianne to feel very boxed in and claustrophobic, which kind of contributes to her eventual problem with eating. In contrast to these characters that Marianne is relatively close to, there is Duncan, who Marianne meets through conducting questionnaires of her job. Duncan is very unapologetically different and unusual. He is a student and he spends all of his time sort of in the world of books and writing. He doesn't really care for ordinary life, nor does he really care for fitting in any way, and I think for Marianne that becomes a source of comfort as she also struggles to fit in. I think one thing that really stands out about this book is that almost every aspect of it that you could expect to go one way does not sort of satisfy that. Marianne engages in a sort of affair with Duncan, except most of the time they do not go further than sort of light physical affection and conversation, where Duncan really refuses to let any romance come between them, which almost serves further as an aspect of comfort for Marianne, because the rest of life is giving her so much pressure to conform and fit into a sort of concrete black and white position but this relationship with this strange man who is almost lacking in any emotion is like just one little doorway into something that doesn't need to prescribe to any societal norm. I think to us now, this sort of doesn't seem like a big deal. Like, we don't need to... I think it's a lot easier now to engage in relationship with others that aren't truly and concretely defined. But back then, obviously, it was a lot harder, especially after a certain age where you are expected to fulfill certain duties with life as a human contributing to society. I think on top of this, something very interesting to me about the relationship between Marianne and Duncan is that for Duncan, despite not being able to fit in and connect with the world and seemingly being quite at odds at even being a human being in general, this doesn't seem to trouble him too much. It's almost amusing to him to find himself in the situation of possessing a human body. It doesn't really bother him. He just kind of exists, floating along, not committing to anything. Whereas for Marianne, it physically makes her ill, because I suppose a point that could be made is that it's always been easier for men to sort of be able to just float and sort of not be tethered to anything. I mean, I've been reading Madame Bovary recently, and it sort of mirrors that, where, I mean, that's much older, but even if a man is lonely, historically, it's easier for him to at least pursue his own wishes and desires, whereas for women, no matter how much desire they have in them, they are often confined to a box. And so, building on from the detail of her becoming physically sick, there is something very interesting and compelling about Marianne's character, that is her strong will to be rational and composed and calm and to figure things out sort of sensibly. It's sort of, despite sort of having this strong will to remain composed, the sheer weight of the expectations and pressures put on her for the way that she's supposed to live her life causes her to no longer be able to eat food properly. She ends up creating this list sort of like of foods that she can no longer eat because they make her feel sick, like her body just rejects it. It's such a deep, like, sort of psychological effect of feeling so out of place and so anxious and so displaced. But in a sort of charming yet haunting way, at the end of the novel, she regains her ability to eat food, which sort of culminates in her baking this cake in the shape of a woman, which she then gives... She eats some herself and then gives it to Duncan, who demolishes it without a thought in the world, like it means nothing to him, it's just a cake. But in the introduction, Margaret Atwood writes, she describes having an interest at the time in symbolic cannibalism. And there is just something so powerful to me about the simple act of her giving the cake in the shape of a woman to this man she has been intimate with, and he can eat it like it's nothing. It really kind of perhaps reflects the way that society is often depicted in Atwood's novels. And there is sort of this exploration of details of the mundane that I really enjoy too, just like bus rides, the details of the advertisements that she sees on her journeys, the setting of the laundromat which her and Duncan meet in multiple times, this depictions of weather, the workplace, her the women that she works with, and the details of their lives and how they present themselves is just so compelling to me. I mean, it all feels so tangible and believable. I don't know, just every detail was interesting to me, despite being relatively low-key at moments. And the depictions of the relationships is so interesting to me. I mean, just the dynamics between each character, even with Peter, the way that Marianne reckons with the way that she wants to be heard and felt and understood, and it's like Peter is just, he can't really seem to connect with her in a deeper way than just man and woman who are fulfilling societal roles, you know, and this desperation is so, you can just really feel it as you read it, as if you, I mean, I think as a woman particularly, you can probably identify with it to some degree. I think while The Handmaid's Tale is highly acclaimed with good reason, the earlier novels of Margaret Atwood that touch on similar issues but in a more sort of realistic day-to-day way are so worth reading as well. And I think even if her first published novel would be your first introduction to her, I think it would still be a good introduction to the rest of her works. There's even touches of humour in it too. I just think that she can very well capture the spectrum of human feelings and life and experience. So if you enjoy sort of explorations of emotions and human relationships and just experiences of the human condition, then I highly recommend this. Thank you for watching.